Welcome back, everyone. I'm talking about the 4 languages that I gave up on during my language learning journey. There are a lot of things that we have to let go of or that we know is not serving us anymore, but at the same time, we experience a lot of loss and even grief letting go of those things, as is the case with me. The first language I gave up on was Vietnamese. Now, I do have a good friend who was adopted from Vietnam. Now, you know that by my channel name, I am very open with my adoptee status being a part of why I created this language learning channel in the first place. Basically, I wanted to learn my heritage language, which is Mandarin originally, and I have also made different friends within different adoptee communities where we essentially share a lot of the struggles that has come with being adopted. And at one point, my friend was thinking about taking a trip to visit where he was essentially born in Vietnam, but was adopted from and wasn't able to actually grow up there. And I thought about actually going with him on this trip. And of course, when I think about going on trips, I think about the language that is spoken on that trip. And I think it would have carried a much stronger bond knowing that we were both going as adoptees to visit this country. But when I started to dabble in it, Pimsleur, usually, I think that's actually the only resource that I used in order to see and investigate, how is this language structured? What does it sound like, etc. There were so many tones and there was a lot of pronunciation that I felt kind of off saying. I don't know, the language did not feel like a source of curiosity for me. Like I didn't want to get to know it better, even though originally my idea was sparked by thinking about even going to Vietnam in the first place. But I eventually decided against going on this trip. And yeah, even though I think that maybe a trip in the future might be possible, that is not justifiable enough for me to devote a certain amount of time and energy to a language that I am not sure about, as opposed to other languages that I am very sure about. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I think we as language learners go through a lot of loss, whether we want to call it that or not. We have to let go of a lot of things, whether that be a method, whether that be a language. And I think it's important for us to recognize and acknowledge that loss for us, because we might feel a little bit silly for feeling like, I don't want to let go. Why do I feel so hung up about this? When in actuality, grief is just as much a part of the process, I think, in language learning as getting really excited about starting something new. With that being said, my second language that I gave up was Dutch. And this came from way back in 2018 when I just decided to take an A1 class in Dutch when I was studying abroad at the Technische Universiteit Dortmund with one of my friends who had a stronger tie to Dutch and certainly a stronger interest, but I was really trying to fill my class schedule. I didn't really find another class that I was interested in taking, and so I decided to just tag along and do this class with him. And lo and behold, I found that it was just not a language that spoke to me, even though it was very easy to learn because I already had an advanced level in German. I am not kidding you either. I actually copied off of my friend's paper at our final exam in order to actually pass the class, because if I didn't pass, then I'd have to repeat, and I just didn't want to do that. But as an almost straight A student back in school, that was a really big decision on my part to actually do. I think it just also shows that I was just not motivated by learning the language. Again, with no connection to it besides my friend just wanting me to do it and be in the class with him. Now, even when that was back in 2018, I did dabble a little bit in Dutch in 2024, and it was a good experience. I also used the app Pimsleur in order to get familiar with the language, with the pronunciation again. And it wasn't a bad language. It's just not a relevant part of my life right now. And I think there's a pressure sometimes in language learning communities to want to accumulate more and more and more languages. There's always this idea that I usually agree with that says that you can learn, this and this language because they're all so similar. After you learn one language, then you can learn another because it's quote unquote easier. I have a lot of different opinions on that, which I won't get into this video necessarily. But again, there's just this pressure and idea that you can just keep on adding languages. That decision of adding more and more languages is not bad or good for anyone, right? It's just neutral, it just is. But I think that for me, with the kinds of mental blocks that I experienced in my language learning and my pressure on myself when I started my language journey of thinking, I have to speak this amount of languages to this level before I can consider myself worthy to be a polyglot or even just be seen as a worthy language learner. And I think that's why I also wanted to give Dutch a try subconsciously, was because I thought, people say that it's easier to learn when I've already learned German, so I might as well just add Dutch and just say that I can speak it, right? Which for my mental health just had a negative impact, because I just felt that when I gave up Dutch, then it was also giving up another chance to be closer to what I felt others would accept me as this really good language learner, right? And I felt less of a language learner when I determined for myself ultimately that I didn't want to learn Dutch. There was no reason for me to do so. So that was also a really hard language to give up for that fact, right? Because it was so tied around my identity, what a good language learner should be in the eyes of other people. And I just wasn't giving that validation to myself. But again, you can't force a connection that isn't there. Maybe in the future, I will develop a new connection to Dutch and be more inspired to learn it, but for now, it's just not in the cards for me. Another language I gave up is Japanese, and I originally was very interested in this language because some of my family are, well, I think they're retired now, but they were missionaries in Okinawa in Japan, and they had spent about 30 to 40 years, their whole career, doing what they loved over there. We had visited them a few times. It was a great experience, and all of them understand and speak Japanese completely fluently. I think some of my cousins were also in their childhoods raised in Japan, and so even though they can't speak it fluently, they can understand it pretty seamlessly. And they also, whenever we go over for holidays, visiting this side of my family, they always host international Japanese students because there's a local university with a really big population of international students. And there's also just a large Japanese community where they live. So over, all of the holiday festivities, I would hear a lot of Japanese being spoken around me. And some of my family members also obviously knew it really well, and they would all just be laughing in Japanese and talking, and I would be there just kind of like, well, everyone knows that I really like languages, so I feel like an imposter when I can't understand what they're saying and I can't partake in the conversation. And so I remember thinking that, and then also saying to myself, well, maybe I can just try to see how Japanese is. And I did try it for a little while, and after figuring out, okay, there are actually 3 alphabets, there are a lot of nuances in cultural expressions and how you change just the whole sentence in order to talk to someone depending on their status. I was thinking about, as I was learning all of these small things, even in Arabic or in Turkish, where there do exist very different cultural expressions depending on context, right? I thought those have been some of the hardest things for me to learn in both of those languages, right? I thought, if I took it up another level, even learning Japanese and having to change not just understanding the expression, but really manipulating all of the sentence in like 12 different scenarios, right? That was just too much for me. And I thought, maybe I need to get used to the cultural expressions, only the cultural expressions in the languages that I am devoting my time right now to, instead of moving to something else where it just feels so overwhelming with how you have to change your whole way of saying things in order to adhere respectfully to the culture whose language you're learning. So I turned away from Japanese and just thought to myself, even though I'm going to be clueless at the dinner table sometimes during holiday festivities, I will bear it for now, because it just hasn't been a language that has really resonated and seems to have a lot of things that I would have to dedicate even more time to learning. And again, with the priority languages that I've had in the past, what I'm working on now, it just does not fit into what I am doing. My 4th language I gave up is Hindi. Now, I am extremely fascinated by the culture, by the history in India, and it's always been on one of my top countries to visit, actually. But I simply don't like how the language sounds. Again, I try to dabble in it with Pimsleur, but I just could not get my agitation off of how the language just sounded to me. That's really it for this language, and what can seemingly feel like a small thing can, over time, over the long term, really put us off of that language. And I knew that from the beginning. I think I also tried to do a little bit of mango languages with this language as well, but even then it just didn't work for me. You know, I told myself, maybe I could learn to like it, but at the same time, I just don't think it's worth finding out. And as I said before, it's better for me to spend time with languages I already know that I like, rather than forcing myself to grow into a language that I know that I don't connect to even on an auditory level. Again, I don't like giving up languages because as a recovering perfectionist, I usually want to give my 100%, but I've learned over time there is an absolutely huge innate value in not finishing something in our languages. And if giving up some languages will allow me for more peace of mind, less overwhelm, less guilt, and being able to learn more about myself and getting curious about why I feel guilty for giving up languages at some points, questioning my identity around why I feel the way that I feel in my learning, ultimately it's me to understand myself better as a language learner, which is the essential ingredient to actually feeling confident over the long term in all of our languages. I also love to work with language learners on this, so any part of this video resonated with you, especially around cultivating a healthy mindset in order to learn your languages confidently up to fluency, I'd love to see if we would be a good fit to work together. So you can book a completely free call in the comments below with me. I'd love to hear in the comments what are some of the languages that maybe you have given up in the past, and we'll see each other in another video soon.